So, hi Ben, what was your first computer?
My first computer was an old Macintosh computer. I forget what model it was, but I got it, I think, in the mid 1990s. My dad got it off an old friend that he worked with.
Okay.
I don't remember the reason why he got it, but yeah, that was the first one I got. It didn't do a lot. I remember it just had a mouse and a keyboard, and it was a big clunky
Okay.
box thing. But yeah, it was quite old.
And it was in Australia.
Yeah, that's right, in Australia. Yeah, that was the first computer I got. The first PC I got, I think, was a few years after that. I think it was a Pentium 2 powered computer. I think
Okay.
in the late 90s, and that one had like the Microsoft Office suite on it. I got a few games with it as well and music, and that was one that I guess had a bit more power than the Mac one that we used for quite a few things. So that was probably the first real computer that I had that I could actually use for
Okay.
something other than just looking at.
So what you did with the Mac? Just played games or?
Yeah, I don't really remember. I think it was just for a few games, and my dad might have used some word processing on it,
Mhm.
but I don't think it had very many games on it at all. So I don't think that really interested in me until I got the PC quite a few years later.
Okay. So then you switched to PC, and Pentium 2 was actually, I guess, it was around 1998 or something like this, right?
Yeah, it was around that time. The big old CRT monitors and the big clunky keyboard and mice, and yeah, I think it was around 1998 around that time.
Was it a color monitor or was it green or ruby?
Yeah, it was color. It was a pretty low resolution, as you'd expect
Yeah.
back in those days. Yeah, it was, yeah, color. Just, yeah, ran Windows 95, I think it was back then. I don't think we had 98. I think it was 95.
I remember my CRT monitor was around, I think the resolution was 800 by 600, I think. I think was already the highest spec, you know. There was the 640 or 480 was normal one. I think my could manage to 800 by 600, something like this. This was days. What I also remember back then, if we wrote software, we wrote the software for particular resolution. And we had to
Oh,
migrate,
wow.
yeah, we had to migrate the user interfaces, the Java user interfaces, from one resolution to another. This is what I really remember. They say, okay, now we had 1024 by 768. This is why I remember still the numbers. And then we had to migrate to a different resolution and see whether it still works. So it was fun at times, actually.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of work. And yeah, these days you just make it responsive and use some frameworks and stuff. But yeah, that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, and it was really hard to convince the people in the enterprise to know that it is not useful to have a pixel perfect design. But the wisdom came later. That's not a really great idea to have a pixel based design, and now it's normal. Back then, it was like somehow dirty. People expect to have a perfect pixel design for everything. So okay, so what you did with the PC?
I think it was mostly playing games. I think I was in high school around that time. Would have been, yeah, 13, 14, 15 years old.
Okay,
And then I think I first got into programming using that computer that I learnt, I guess, the basics of programming back in high school around that time. And then I think I used that computer when I got home to study and then
mhm.
sort of start my first computer programming outside of school on that. So
Okay.
that's where it started.
What games did you play?
I think the main one I played was Time Crisis, which was one of those games that you'd go play in the arcade and you get one of those little plastic guns and shoot the bad guys. Um, I think SimCity 2000 might have also been on that computer.
Okay.
I enjoyed that sort of city building game. That was pretty popular around that time. They're the two that really stand out, I think, around that time.
Okay. And were you forced to start programming, or you did it because of out of curiosity or other motivation?
I think it was a bit of both. We had some classes in year nine, so when I was about 14 or so, where we learned the basics of designing a web page using just some HTML, and I think it was Microsoft Frontpage was the software we used at the time. So it wasn't really programming, we were just sort of clicking and dragging things onto a screen. And we did that as a subject in school, and I found that quite interesting. So I looked into how to get that working at home, and I used to go into the computer in my lunch break and just play with the design a little bit more. And then, yeah, once I got it working at home, worked out how to do it from there using the same program we had at school. And that really, I guess, got me interested in programming. Starting with that class, and then, yeah, moving on from there.
I also had to use Frontpage because companies asked me about that. And what I was scared about, the output. So if you took a look what actually Frontpage generates, it is you cannot understand that. So I thought, okay, HTML is really hard to learn because the output of Frontpage.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, and but I mean, Frontpage is not really programming. So what was your first programming language? So
yeah, the first one I learned was Visual Basic. I believe I learned that. I think I learned that at school as well. And what really got me into that was one of my friends in high school. He was into it first, and he knew a lot more about it than I did. And he, at the time, Pokemon, that Japanese cartoon, was quite popular back in the 90s or early 2000s. And he made this like screen or computer program at the time that was like interactive and showed you the different pictures and descriptions of these Pokemon. And I thought that was just really incredible how he could create software to do exactly what he wanted. And that really got me curious as to how it all worked. So I asked him to make me one and then show me how it worked. And then I think I borrowed some books from school and sort of slowly learned how Visual Basic worked and the basics of programming, sort of writing code and variables and all that kind of stuff. And eventually built just some really tiny sort of Visual Basic applications on my computer. I don't remember what any of them were. I think they were just practice ones like calculator apps or something. I guess that was the first real programming language that I learned. It's not really a programming language that's used anymore, but that was my first introduction to the concepts of programming, which was I thought quite exciting.
I think Visual Basic is still around, no?
Yes, yeah, you're right. It is. Yeah, I haven't seen it being used that much. It could just be where I've been at, but it still is around.
So I think we should do some research. I think even it could be, it could still ship with the Visual Studio tool chain from Microsoft, even, I would say. Because what I could imagine that you can still automate, the Office stuff with Visual Basic. I don't think they could just shut it down. It's amazing. Lots of programmers actually started with Visual Basic.
Yeah, it is. A few that I've worked with and spoken to started with that language. Yeah, okay, cool. Quite common, I think.
So, what happened then? So you learned Visual Basic. It was inspired by Pokemon, which is still a thing right now, right? A little bit with AR or AR experience, but still. What was the next program you wrote?
Next from there, I think I got towards late high school and I enrolled in some of the more IT or computer programming classes. We got to late high school where we could actually choose the classes we wanted to do. And by then I was pretty interested in computer programming. So I chose the IT subjects, and they taught us Java, I think it was, back in around 2001, 2002. And I thought that was really interesting because it seemed like there was a lot more you could do with Java at the time than what I'd had experience with doing. And that was interesting. I found it was quite easy to learn the basics of, I think just because I've had that experience and I looked it up, I guess the programming concept sort of outside of school. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't remember what we built with Java at the time. It might have just been whatever the assignments they gave us in school were. But yeah, it was really interesting. That was the next language I learned, Java.
It's interesting because I learned Java first and then had to learn Visual Basic. I forget why. Properly, I don't know why, but for me, Visual Basic was really hard to learn if you know Java. Because, I expected like the code first experience, and the Visual Basic was more like UI first. So, and it was the same experience, by the way. I also had wanted to learn Flash. I think Flash programming, yes, was also really hard for me because what I also expected, to have a source code in one place. And you had to know that in specific keyframes there was some hidden source code, which for me it was like I couldn't get why, right? So and this is amazing. So if you start with Visual Basic first and then you like Java, so I thought this is like more problematic, but probably 2001. I think it was JDK 1.2 or 1.3 or something like this, right?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then you stick with Java? No, what?
Yeah, I did. That was year 11 and 12, so that would be in 2002, 2003. From there, I went to university and did like a software development, computer science kind of course. Mm-hmm. The first part of that was focused on PHP, so I learned quite a bit about that. And there was also some components of Java as well, so I continued some of the Java through university and also learned PHP, and that's where I learned a little bit about, I guess, programming web pages that I hadn't really learned about since, I guess, those front page days, and learning about databases as well, because I think that was the first time I really got exposed to it.
Okay. And so you stick with Java and then PHP. What was the most impressive thing you wrote during your university time as a student? You remember that with Java?
Yeah, I think the thing I was most impressed with at the time was I think I had a lot of files on a lot of different CDs,
Mhm.
and at the time I'd had like a box of them in my desk, and I spent a lot of time trying to search through these different CDs to try to find files that I was looking for.
Mhm.
And I thought, wouldn't it be good if there was a way that I could get a list of all of these files
Mhm.
and their file size and location and what disk they're on, and put them in a list so I could just search them on the computer without having to swap all the CDs.
Mhm.
So I wrote a program that did that. I don't remember the details of how I did it. I think it might have just been a basic MySQL database and like a command line Java program, but it was sort of solved the problem that I had. I sort of brought up the command line, and I think I typed in, I don't remember what the command was, but typed in something to search, and it showed me the file names that matched the search and what disks they're on, which was pretty useful. It saved me a lot of time when I was looking for the right file on the CD.
This sounds for me like sharding almost, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
HCD is like a cluster, a database in a cluster, and and you have the index outside, so you can and so you probably use JDBC, MySQL driver, and command line just and simple Java app, right, with some command line parsing. Yeah.
Yep.
So and actually. We are back to that. I don't know whether you are aware. So there is a Java and GraalVM, and these days I create lots of small utilities with Java, the command line utilities, and they start really quick in 10 milliseconds, something like that. So now
Cool.
we are back to the time, because what you can do right now, you can cross-compile Java to native code, and then what you get out is like just a binary, a native image, which is directly executable, which is really useful. And back then it was a little bit harder, because with Java you had to do this Java -jar thing, and now it feels like Go library or a shell script.
Yeah, cool. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
That's really handy. Yeah.
So what happened then? So after university, what happened? So you stick with Java still?
I didn't stick with Java after university. As I got more into my university classes, I found more drawn or more curious towards the database subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And I first learned MySQL, and then we learned a bit of Oracle as well. And I just found that level of database knowledge and what they were teaching is really interesting. So I did all the database subjects I could handle, or the ones that they offered in uni. And because I thought it was quite interesting. So after I finished my uni degree in 2007, I was ready to start applying for jobs. And I thought my database skills were stronger than my Java or other software development skills. So I applied for some database development or database support roles. And then, got my first job in 2007 working for a consulting company. And the first client they sent me to was to do maintenance and support on a database application that had a lot of their code in the database. So I could use those database skills that I learned in uni and that kind of thing directly into the job, which was good.
Where was it? Sydney, or was it in Australia?
It was in Melbourne. So I've worked and lived in Melbourne ever since then. Down the south end of Australia in Melbourne.
Okay, and you grew up in a large city, or?
Yeah, grew up in the suburbs of Melbourne, sort of 20 or 30 minutes out in the eastern suburbs. So went to uni out there, went to school there, and then my first taste of city life was going into the office 5 days a week for the job in 2007. Yeah,
I hope you will answer. I grew up with some Aborigines, somewhere in the woods, and and I really enjoyed hiking, at nights. This was all. It sounds like Germany to me, almost, right? Okay.
Yeah.
What involves database maintenance? Are you the guy who creates the DDL scripts, or you had to look after the table spaces, or what was your job actually?
Back then, it was partly making sure that the programs that relied on the database kept running, and partly fixing, bugs that had been discovered. There was a lot of manual processes that we had to do, like logging onto the FTP server and downloading a file and putting it in a folder and running a script. These kind of things that would often be automated now, but back then it was quite manual. And we'd also have to resolve issues in the code that we were working with. There was working for a utilities company, and their databases at the time, they ran all their business logic out of Oracle PSQL code, which is like a procedural language inside the Oracle database. So we had to go in and find the issues or the causes of these bugs and develop a solution and test it and get it released into their testing and then production databases. So it was partly, fixing problems, partly developing solutions to bugs that have already been found.
Actually, the PL/SQL language is pretty sophisticated. So they even have packages. It's almost object-oriented, I would argue. And what I remember back then is there were books from an author called, I think, Feuerstein or something like this. You remember this? And he
Steve Feuerstein or Feuerstein,
Yeah, Feuerstein, exactly. There's a Feuerstein is like Firestone. This is a German name. So this is Feuerstein, and he wrote for O'Reilly, I think, and I was really fascinated by Oracle back then as a Java programmer, because for me it was like almost an operating system back then, And I knew some database administrator who spent lots of time optimizing and tuning the database, and I was always curious what happens and what they are actually doing, because I just accessed the database and they were more like, you remember the guy from Matrix, the architect? You saw the movie Matrix? The last guy, the architect, this was like, the database admin somewhere in Ivory Tower, sitting in a nice place and thinking about the databases, right? And
I remember that.
Yeah. And how long you spent at the company?
I was at that company for about 9 years, and they were a consulting company. So they would send me out to a client to do some project work there. And that first client I was with for about 3 years. And then once I was ready for a new role after that time, I moved on to a different client, but still with the same consulting company. So I was about 3 years in that Oracle development support team. And then I moved on to a different role after that, doing, I guess, a half business analyst, half development role.
And what development role means PL/SQL development, or what means development role?
Yeah, that one was a mix of SQL Server development work and what was actually VBA. So the client there had a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets that helped them do like pricing analysis work, and they wanted to merge them all together into one big spreadsheet. And I think this was around 2010 at the time. So I tried to convince them that maybe having a big spreadsheet wasn't the best solution. Maybe they should go for something a bit more manageable, like some kind of web programming language on a server that a lot of people can access. But excuse me, they were pretty adamant they wanted to go the spreadsheet way. So I just went with what they preferred to use and sort of learned a bit more about how VBA and Excel work together using the knowledge that I learned years ago on Visual Basic, and then did that. So developed this really big spreadsheet that worked with a SQL server in the background to, I guess, load some data and let their like pricing and sales teams come up with like good prices for their customers that worked for everybody. So that was a role that I was with for about 3 years, and it was a good role.
Did you have to relearn your skills from Oracle to MySQL Server, or?
Yeah, there was a little bit of relearning. I knew the basics because, of course, a lot of the standard SQL is common across both Oracle and SQL Server, but I had to learn a lot of the SQL Server specific stuff, which wasn't too hard because once you just learn the database fundamentals, it's pretty easy to pick up how things are different across databases, but you'd need a lot more experience to find out the little nuances with SQL Server. So it wasn't that hard overall, and there was a few of us in the team that were a bit more experienced, so that was good to ask them questions when I wasn't sure or had some questions about SQL Server.
So are you more the database developer or more like, the database administrator, performance tuner, or what's your role actually?
Probably more of a developer. Okay. I'm more comfortable designing databases and writing scripts to do that and scripts to select data from databases. I know the basics of database administrators, but every project I've been on, they've always had a separate DBA.
Okay.
I've had people ask me, how do I get started in DBA, or specific questions around administrator work, and I'd always point them elsewhere to other places or other people because my knowledge on that isn't that deep.
Okay. And so you did first the Oracle job with PL/SQL, then VBA with Microsoft SQL, and what was the next assignment?
Next one, what did I do next? The Excel SQL Server job was half business analyst and half development work.
Mm-hmm.
And the next role I went into was a little bit of the same. It was just a short-term role doing some Excel and SQL Server work for a different area of that company. And I was there for a few months, and then it came up that they needed a business analyst full-time role. And I put my hand up for that because I'd had a few years doing that kind of role in the first team. So at the time, I felt more satisfied doing that work as opposed to sort of the Excel VBA stuff. So then I sort of moved full-time into a business analyst BA role. I think that was around 2013 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, the same client. I was in that role for 3 years again as well. Yeah.
Okay. So nice iterations, 3-year cycle. So until two. So one question is regarding database development, PL/SQL. How you develop a database? So are you using Visual Studio Code or JDeveloper? Which tools you are using, or do you have code completion? I remember what I used sometimes. How it's called? It was not Frog, but similar. There was a database tool, Oracle, a third-party tool. It was not called Frog, but
Toad.
Toad, exactly. Toad, not Frog. Toad. JDeveloper back then, and of course the PL/SQL terminal, how to call it, this and what I remember back then, this would impress me, because if you open the terminal from Oracle, this PL/SQL command line, how it's called, PL/SQL command line, right? This like if you just open the
SQL Plus or just
SQL Plus,
the SQL
exactly.
terminal or something.
So mine was odd. What all the developers did, they had code completion. You could actually write SQL to customize the SQL Plus, which was really impressive to me. So I watched them, hacking their stuff, and there was the loading and unloading, and I was really impressed. I got this really cool stuff. And which tools did you use back then? I mean, how? Notepad or how you wrote your stuff?
Yeah, back then we used SQL Developer, which was the free tool provided by Oracle. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after that, I think the company transitioned to a tool called PL SQL Developer, which was a paid tool. It was by a company called All Around Automations.
Okay.
And it was a lot like Toad, from what I heard from the other more experienced developers, but it was a lot cheaper and didn't have as many features. So I think the feeling at the time was Toad was like the top level tool, had all the features, the best one to use. But the second best they felt at the time was this PL SQL Developer tool, which we were using, which was quite handy. And then, the Oracle SQL Developer tool was the free version offered by Oracle. But I think it's changed a lot and gotten better over the time since then. And that's the main one that I use now for any Oracle work that I do. But at the time it was those other two.
This is the Java-based Oracle developer, right? This is
that's right, yeah.
Where you can see all the tables. Okay, this is what I also know. And is Toad still around?
Yep.
You know that?
It is, it's still around. I think they still bring out releases every year, every 6 months or whatever it is. It's still around. I think it's still highly regarded by a lot of people that use Oracle databases, but I think a lot of other tools have caught up, and companies might not be willing to pay, these high prices for these tools when they can get similar value from the free or other tools. So, but Toad is still around.
And are you using the JetBrains toolchain? Because they also have, the great database tools. So, the JetBrains?
DataGrip.
DataGrip, exactly. I use the DataGrip for various databases, actually. They even support NoSQL. Are you using them as well?
I actually am. I started using them maybe 3 months ago. I was doing some research into different IDEs or SQL editors, and I was using quite a few different ones for different databases, and I was looking for one that worked on a Mac and actually worked with a few different databases. And that DataGrip by JetBrains was one that had a lot of positive reviews. So I purchased that and downloaded that a few months ago, and I've been using it since then, and it's been quite useful so far. It seems to be pretty quick, pretty responsive, and does what I need it to do, which is pretty good.
So you're using DataGrip for Oracle development as well?
Yes.
And is it better than the Oracle developer, the free one? Or, you mean?
It seems a bit more polished, the screen and the design. I haven't gotten into the features as much to really know if it's better for Oracle-specific work, but it's done everything I needed to do so far. So, I'm pretty happy with it.
And have you looked at Visual Studio Code, the free editor from Microsoft? Because I guess there are some plugins from vendors to support database development. At least what I already used, I just used the SQL highlighting, and this was really decent. And have you took a look at Visual Studio Code?
I've had a quick look at it. Yeah, I haven't used that much because most of my work with databases is just with the database itself, and not so much with any programming languages or software development outside of that. But I've heard that it's a lot more common for developers to use like an IDE for developing code with like some plugins or something that access the database instead of loading up like SQL Server Management Studio or another IDE separately. So I haven't, but I've heard they're quite good.
Because I'm using it for software development, JavaScript, HTML, Java, and I think it should be also good for databases, because what it does, for instance, for Kubernetes or YAML, it sometimes it is able to auto suggest things based on metadata. So I would think that probably there are nice plugins for databases where you get auto suggestion as well. So it would be I will have to look at this because it would be interesting.
Yeah,
I got a spontaneous idea right now because usually I tend to buy tools to work with database. I also bought Postico, I think, for Postgres was called, right? So I always use the more specific tools or data grip, but I never tried with Visual Studio Code, but I think it should be also a decent support. My problem is I'm consulting as well, and I cannot just go into a company and require all the developers to buy tools, because at least in Europe, it can take time until the companies are willing, to confirm the spending or assign some budget to the tools, regardless how cheap or expensive the tools are. So if you find a free tool, you're always on the bright side. Okay, nice. So we business analyst. So what you did as a business analyst?
Yeah, in the teams I was with, they worked with developers to I guess update or create the software for the business team. So what I would do, I'd work with the developers and then the business team, like the pricing team or whoever else was internal, to understand what they wanted out of their software, and then I guess work with the developers to make that happen. So I guess the biggest project I was on at that time was to actually replace that big Excel spreadsheet that I'd helped create with a web-based tool. So that actually got the approval and funding to go and build a proper web-based tool to do all this pricing work instead of relying on the spreadsheet. So I was doing the business analyst work on that to speak to the team that used the tool and find out what they wanted and help the developers build the tool, which was good. I enjoyed doing the BA work, speaking to people and helping them understand their issues, as well as having the software developer background. It was good to understand both the business users and the developers as well. Because a lot of BAs don't have the development background, and it can be hard to understand that software side. So, yeah, that was mostly what my role was for a few years there.
Why I'm asking, because I really had bad experiences with business analysts, and as a consequence, as a developer, I really hated them. And I try, to find a way to avoid contact with business or system analysts. What happens in my project as a developer, I ask, business analyst a question, and the business answer was always 80 or 90% of the time, I don't know the answer, but I will find it out. I'm back in 2 days, and then the business analyst walk away to the users, ask some question, and I say, okay, what we should do? We should deliver the software as fast as quickly as possible. Then we are in direct contact, to the user, and then we can skip the analyst. And regardless what the analysts are going to say, we'll ignore him and go straight to to the users. And this was my way, And therefore, I'm asking. But I think a good analyst is really the problem was these analysts were external, and they had not, the deep domain knowledge they should have. So the problem was they, in one point of time, the developers knew more about the target domain than the analysts. This was the problem, because if they are forced, to work with the software all the time, because of the, the thinking we have to do with if, else, all the logical stuff we are doing, you are forced to think more deeply about the domain than the analyst has to do, because for analysts is just, get a rough idea is often enough. This is why I'm curious how you worked. So how often had you go back to the users and ask questions, or were you able, how this worked in your case?
Yeah, that's a good point. I found that happened a lot with some of the people I worked with as well, because sometimes as an analyst, it can feel like you're getting in the way, especially if you're starting in a new role because you don't have all the answers. And I guess the best way to avoid that and to become a better analyst is to, like you said, understand the problem domain and what the users are actually working with, so you can actually answer the developers' questions when they ask them on the spot, and know the difference between the questions you can answer then and the ones that you actually need to go and confirm, the ones you don't know the answer to, and find out. And also being a good business analyst can be helpful, especially if you're working with the business users who often don't have time to contribute to the project or work with the developers or answer the questions, to help be someone who's full-time working with the development team to answer the questions, so they don't have to wait 2 or 3 days to get some time with someone. They can ask someone a question straight away. And also having a bit of experience with development work, knowing the kind of questions to ask of the users as well. Because you might be able to anticipate different scenarios that the developers might ask. So you'd ask the business users that in advance, go back to the development team and answer their questions, and I guess help make the whole team and whole project work smooth. So yeah, it comes with a bit of experience, but it's a role that I enjoyed.
What could work in projects? So this was my thinking back then. If the business analyst has developer background, they should be involved before the project starts to explain the users what is actually possible. Because the problem was the users expected things which were either too trivial or not possible at all. And then, we wasted some cycles at the beginning of the project. But if the, business analyst would be a proxy from development and talk with the clients and educate them, which is possible with our technology or what isn't. And then, what also could work, I think, if the business analysts have the power to be the proxy from the users, and it will just, try to drive the software developments, and this could also work. But if the business analyst in the middle, then it's a really hard job, because then you will have, you are forced to perform all the thinking we are doing as developers without writing code. And for me, it is more, I cannot do this. So if I write code, I'm far more specific than thinking in Word or, on paper, because then I say, okay, I just think, it's boring for me because there is no execution, no verification, no feedback. This is, I'm curious now how it's a really hard job then, but which could be fun if you are proxy of the user and you are allowed to make decisions by yourself, and just try to use the software all the time and provide improvements. This is, I think, could be a great job, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's why I enjoyed it. Sort of getting involved in both sides of the system and of the team, and learning more about both sides. And yeah, it's what I enjoyed.
Yeah, then I'm curious. So, what was your next job? Still business analyst or no more?
Yeah, after that, I left the consulting company and the client as well, and that was late 2016.
Okay.
And after that, I decided to do some contracting or freelancing work for, I guess, what you call it. I got a contract with the government agency doing some business analyst work for them as well. They had a project where they were upgrading their Microsoft CRM tool to the latest version, and they needed a business analyst in there. So I got involved and worked with them for about 2 years and finished that in 2018.
Okay.
2019, yeah, that's when I finished that.
And then you're still freelancer right now?
Then I decided to go back into full-time consulting work. So I found a job at another consulting company. So similar to the first one I started at, and doing business analyst work, which is what I'm doing now. And that was, mid-2019. And I've been at that company now, up until now. And still with them just over a year, doing some business analyst work, which is, it's enjoyable.
So then, why you ask me to write a statement on your blog? So what's the deal with your blog?
Yeah, how does that fit in? How does a business analyst get to write a blog about databases?
Yeah.
So you probably noticed over this time, I'd moved slowly away from the development side, more into the BA side, but I still had that interest and passion in database work and development. So I started a blog and a website maybe 2014, around that time, just writing about my experiences and things with Oracle SQL, and sort of slowly did that on the side. And then that sort of evolved over the years and sort of grown as my experiences have grown with SQL and all that database work that I've been doing on the side that hasn't really been part of the day job. And that's where it's at now.
Okay, so that's actually a great idea. So that you are a business analyst, by day, and Oracle developer at night, right? So, and you
that's essentially it. Yeah,
and this is very important, because I think if you spend too much time being business analyst, or in my case it would be just plain architect, we at one point of time we cannot talk to developers anymore. So okay, so then you're writing a blog and you found somehow me as a Java developer and asked me about my opinion about databases, and what I answered is that this is what I would like to talk with you is you have to think what is your master, where the value is. Is the value in the database, or is the added value in Java? So in my world is Java in software. And what I saw project failing is where we had, very powerful database administrator who was in charge of designing the database, and really powerful Java architect who had wanted to have a perfect Java object. And there was a huge time wasted because having that is really hard. You cannot do, perfect normalized database and perfect object design in Java because, as you probably know, if you have a highly normalized database, you will need a lots of, joins and you have really fine-grained Java objects, which would probably lead you to poorer performance. So what's your take on that? So, are you okay with that we say we will misuse your Oracle database as just, file system? Or you say, no, the database always has to be, highly normalized?
Good question. I think it would there'd be a balance between both. I think it would probably come down to the team's discussion and what they value out of the design and the system. My preference would be to have the normalized database, but I guess being a member of the team, I'd probably leave it up to, the final decision up to the team. And if they felt that going with the more Java object compatible design was the best way to go, then that would be what I'd go with. But yeah, I don't have a lot of experience in that area, so I'd probably go with their opinions on that. So yeah, that's probably the approach I would take.
What happened to me? It was around 2001, 2003 was huge project, almost failed. And there was the database back then was really powerful, and he wanted to have everything normalized. And because he was so convincing, we didn't question his decisions. And the problem was, for instance, I remember we had lots of one-to-n relations just because he wanted to have them because of the normalization. And the performance was really bad. And I don't know how it happened, but there was a third person, internal person who came in. I was always external. And we just questioned this. And then we were allowed, to make to roll back his decision and just, no, there's one-to-one relations. So we merged the one-to-one relations to a bigger table, and then we didn't have to to have the relations on the database on the Java Hibernate back then, or JPA, and this improved the performance a lot. And then we denormalized the database more and more, and then the entire project was really successful. And then we could do whatever we liked, and it even worked 20 years ago. So I think, what's your opinion on that? So or was this guy not a real good database administrator? Because what I would do in one point of time, I would just try to monitor the queries and see where the performance get lost, and then suggest from the database perspective, then maybe it is a good idea to merge, the tables, right?
Yeah, that'd be my approach as well. If there was something or an approach that someone was claiming was the best way, and other people were questioning it, then yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to question it, like you or the other person did. And maybe as well, running some performance tests against that approach, or maybe even developing sort of a branch off the main code base and using a different design and seeing how that might compare, saying this is your design, it's performing like this, and this is another design where we merge the tables together and it's actually performing better. So using some tests or some data or something to explain that there are other ways that might be better. But yeah, I guess that can be hard to convince people.
Yeah, I was just curious because you are the database developer, business analyst, and open-minded, and we have to chat, to ask you whatever I like. So
yeah, sure.
Another problem I saw with database, not problem. One of the reasons why you used NoSQL a few years ago was not necessarily because Oracle or the other database didn't scale. The problem we had is because the database is more or less type safe. The DDL, it can take a long time. Your update, your table management scripts can take hours sometimes. And what I heard at once, there was one developer at my workshop, and they developed a game, and the results of the game were stored in my SQL cluster. And they say if they would change the major table, it would take weeks, to update all the table. I never heard about that, but it's okay. That's really bad. So it means because we were not able anymore to maintain the tables, and you have to take the entire database offline, we were forced to either denormalize the table and misuse relational databases as NoSQL key value stores basically, or we introduce NoSQL databases just because don't be that type safe and have faster updates. Have you saw something as like this in production as well, or was it, or how you handle that? How you handle the DDL
I've seen
updates?
I've seen that with most of the projects I've worked with, and where the common theme is the database changes or structural changes to the database take a lot longer than code changes, because a lot of code changes can be done quicker, and database changes need a whole different process to go through. And there was one project I was on last year. So as I was a BA, they were developing a database or an application that needed a lot of customization of the fields and attributes by the users using the system. So they needed like a flexible schema, and they also needed really fast read time. So it was much more common to read the data than update the data. So they designed a JSON or a NoSQL design as opposed to like a normalized MySQL database, for example. So that was something where they used NoSQL in their design to overcome the issues that you might have with trying to update DDL. And another thing I've noticed is that the deployment processes everywhere I've worked have been quite manual. And I read a book a few years ago called Continuous Delivery, and that was, I don't know if you've read that or heard of it, and that was all about the concept of automating build and deployment. Mm-hmm. And that really, I guess, changed the way that I viewed software and deployment, and thought that anyone who was doing this had a really big advantage. And one team that I was working with was doing this, and they managed to not only automate their code deployment and testing, but also their database deployments as well. Mm-hmm. Using, I think, Flyway. There was some tool that has a way to automatically create scripts and deploy them and build them from scratch, and all the benefits you get from code as well. So I think teams that try to automate their code and database deployments can have those kind of quick and easy DDL script updates as well, to try and avoid that issue of having to take weeks for database changes.
This tools we also are using. So there is a Flyway DB, which is a German tool, as it was the committer is actually from Germany. So and there is the Liquibase, and the Liquibase is more powerful. I don't know whether you heard about Liquibase. What the Liquibase does, it is able to abstract different database dialects. So we are in my project, we are preferring FlywayDB because it's direct mapping between, SQL you write and the SQL from database. And this is what you usually will get from the database people. And Liquibase provides more, almost like DSL. It is more powerful and therefore more magic, and we don't like magic usually. So the problem we still had, if the database is big, the FlywayDB process takes too long.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine it would be. I haven't had any experience myself in the details of Flyway. I've heard of Liquibase as well, but I haven't used it. But yeah, I can imagine that'd be a problem when database sizes grow quite large.
Or forget about FlywayDB. Just if you are the database administrator and you perform structural changes, this can also take 1 hour.
Yeah, and I've been with teams that have had overnight deployments where they take the database down or do something and do their database deployment and testing, and it can take 1 hour, 2 hours, 8 hours. So it takes time.
How do you deal with that? Because the application is offline then, right?
Yeah, true. If it was up to me, I'd probably implement something that was mentioned in that continuous delivery book, to have some kind of alternate server that was still keeping the application alive and develop or deploy the changes. Like if you got the backup server or the B server online, you'd make the upgrade to the A server and then switch them over. Something like that, or some kind of technique that has minimal impact or minimal outage to the application, and be able to still make your changes that you need to.
Okay. And how you deal with rollbacks? So let's say the Java guys, we developers found some bug, and we will have to roll back out the changes. So for us, it's not a huge problem. So we just can roll back the commit, ship the new, Docker container or Kubernetes or whatever we have. But are there any, tools in Oracle space, whatever, where it's really easy, to roll back to the recent state? Or do you have what are you doing usually in such cases?
What I've seen teams do is, most of the teams I've worked with use like a manual rollback script. So they have like their SQL script that would make the changes, and then they'd have to create one that would undo the changes. So perform the DDL that would perform the opposite effect. And after they deploy the change and then do some tests to make sure it's okay, if something goes wrong, then they would run the rollback script to reverse the change. and they would still have that script in case they needed to days or weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, they'd use some tool. I assume Flyway or Liquidbase would have a similar kind of thing where you could roll back to a certain change. I think Redgate, another software company, has some tools that does similar things.
Okay.
I haven't used them, but I think that you'd use some kind of specialized tool, ideally, to automatically roll back.
There is nothing in Oracle, so some hidden Oracle functionality which does that.
Nothing that I can think of. There might be something that's come out recently, but yeah.
What we used back then, what I remember for development, is like flashback or something. So we can roll back very quickly the entire database, but it was more for development. And it worked well. So we could always roll back the entire database. And then what we also did, we ran Oracle XE in a Docker container. And then I can always restart the container. But I was more curious about what the serious Oracle projects are doing in production.
Yeah, I haven't had any recent Oracle experience, and those sound like they would those ideas would work quite well. I know Oracle has a feature called editions where you can have different areas of the database operating at the same time, but I haven't tried that feature at all, so I'm not that familiar with it. But yeah, flashbacks could work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't had any recent, I guess, large-scale production issues with that recently.
What I also observe is the Postgres gets actually more and more popular. I don't know what is also your observation. So in my projects, Postgres gets really big. And regarding JSON, what Postgres is able to do, they have a JSON B. This is like the binary JSON support, and they can even perform queries. And on one startup project, what we did is we had a table with which was type safe. Let's say 5 columns. And the last column was just the JSON column. And we dropped there whatever was not that relevant. But we knew, this is what was like, if the user, there was like, the user social links or whatever, which could change at any time, but it was actually pointless. And this worked surprisingly well. And recently I also found somewhere there's a common pattern, to have in a relation database, like one column which is less specific, or is it just the addition or metadata, or how to call it, extension column, right?
I've seen it as well in some examples online, and that team that I worked with that had that used that database to store the JSON structure that was needed to be high read. I think they store that in PostgreSQL as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the good thing about those JSON columns in the database these days, as opposed to having like just a large text field, is it automatically validates that you've got a valid structure as well. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of other functions you can use in recent versions, which makes it really useful for those extension columns and things you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. And you're still using Oracle right now? Still Oracle shop?
Yeah, mostly Oracle. On my website, I write about Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, and PostgreSQL. For most of the time the website was active, it was Oracle. But I found that I was curious about these other databases, and they seem to be the most common. And I've had different experiences with each of them over the years, so it's expanded to those. So yeah, it's probably equal all four. But yeah, most of my history and background's with Oracle.
So what I really see as a Postgres is immensely catching up. So Postgres is the big thing, even bigger than MySQL. So in my world, and so enterprise Java developer. So in my world, Postgres becomes more and more dominant, and also Oracle. So and some projects use Microsoft SQL, and very few projects DB2, for instance. This is mainly mainframes, I would say. And so another question is what you did in project. What I see more and more, then we have one database or schema or whatever isolated part per microservice. So because the DDL changes are hard, we try to create smaller databases, and then of course we get the problems with transactions and whatever. But we handle the transactions from the business perspective. Also, is this a trend which you also observe, or is still one large database and microservices are picking from the large database part? So what's your observation?
Yeah, I've seen that trend as well in the client that I recently started working with about a year ago. They started using this microservice architecture where, they'd have different services and each of them would have their own database, and they developed that, work together really well. That was the first instance that I'd seen of that, only because before that I was working for that government client that was upgrading the CRM, and before that was something else. So the current client I'm working with is really using that, and it seems to be working well. I think they're a company that's moving away from Oracle and like these larger companies towards PostgreSQL for some of their newer projects as well. So yeah, I'm seeing that same trend as well.
Okay, nice. And the next thing, what I also observe is, you are aware of CDC, change data capture techniques. So this is in Oracle,
No.
Extreme tool is called in Oracle. And what it does is if you write something to a table, in the same transaction, an event is created and flashed to, let's say, Kafka queue or something, to Kafka topic. And so the idea is that you get the entire history of database outside of the database, and the microservices are able, to pick the data from the topic. Like one interesting project for you could be Debezium, for instance, and does exactly that. And so what we are doing, you have a legacy database recently where, perform this change data capture. And then you can even replicate a data, let's say a database like, your master Oracle database with, let's say, your less important Postgres database with CDC, for instance. And this was also a nice workaround because in one project we couldn't change the layout of the Oracle database, and we replicate the data to our own database, and then we can do whatever we liked, right? So there was not a huge problem. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'll have to look into that. That sounds good.
CDC. The problem
CDC.
with Oracle is the licensing, because you will need, I think, for Extreme the Golden Gate license, something like this.
Okay.
And Postgres works out of the box. So there is it's called, I think, logical decoding, where you can hook into the Postgres engine where the events happen. Perfect. So last question.
Good to know.
How you found me, actually, because you're not a Java developer. You asked me one point of time, to write a statement for your blog, and it's like, who are you actually? And I look at your blog, so okay, this is interesting, and I would just write, whatever I know, because I at first I thought I cannot contribute anything meaningful to your blog, but then I thought, okay, at least I will write about my opinion about what is the value for the project, the database or the software, right?
Good. So yeah, thanks again for contributing to that page. I think a lot of people found that useful. So I found you after coming up with an idea for that post where I wanted to ask some people who are more experienced with development if they had any advice for other developers working with databases. And I thought that if I was a junior developer or just another developer and open up a page that had opinions from 20 or 30 other people on their different experiences, I thought that would be useful. So then I came up with that short question, and I just did some research online and on Twitter for common software developer blogs in a lot of different languages, and then had the list, and then just started going through the websites and seeing if they were pretty good, and then just sort of sending emails and tweets to people who ran those, and yours was one that came up.
Okay, what is the title of the blog you've wrote? The title of the post you've wrote? Do you remember that?
Let me just look it up now. I think it was something like 27 software developers share their advice for working with databases.
Because I read the post, and what I found interesting, there were complete different or various advices, right? From very detailed to high level. So it was really nice post because you got a really wide range of different answers to the questions, which I found really entertaining, because mine was very high level and the others were really deep into the optimization weeds, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people have had different experiences and work with different databases and languages, so there was quite a wide range of advice. And I read some of the comments on the post after I published it that people didn't agree with the advice that some people gave as well. So that was interesting that it's not commonly known things, and some people don't agree with it, but it's good to know what people's thoughts were.
Okay, nice. So what is your blog? What is your the audio of your blog?
It's databasestar.com.
Databasestar. Mm-hmm. And do you have a Twitter presence as well?
Yeah, I do. It's just at databasestar. I'm trying to be more active on there recently. I think occasionally I put up a post when I publish it, try to retweet other links and sites that I find useful. I haven't been active on it a lot recently, but I'm trying to get back into it because it seems a lot of people in the development and database world are active on Twitter as opposed to other places. So trying to get into it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I will post, put your blog to the show notes, and it was really nice to chat with a database developer and business analyst. So I invited my enemies, to the show.
That's good. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you.